Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session in the Shape Your Future series, where we're exploring the STEM career journeys of Australia's rising stars. Today, we'll be hearing from Grace Lethlean. I am Mohammad Rahman Sabuj, a PhD researcher in the pharmacy discipline and at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. And I'm also a part of Catalyst program at the Academy of Technology and Engineering. As we gather from around Australia, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we meet. I am joining you today from Turrbal and Yogara land. I pay respect to elders and past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people who join us online today. As we share and discuss our own knowledge and practice, as we share or discuss our own knowledge and practices, we acknowledge the deep knowledge forever embedded in the custodianship of the country. Before we get into this session, you would have seen that this is being recorded. These and all talks in this series will be available on the STELR YouTube channel for you to revisit anytime. There is also a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, drop them in here. We will get to them either during the talk or in the discussion at the end. There is also a chat function, but any questions should be in the Q&A section. Finally, you will be sent a feedback form and worksheet after this session to the email you registered with. Please let us know what went well and what you might like to see in our series next year. Now, I would like to introduce Grace to tell us how she came to be working in digital health. Grace.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to meet you. I'm going to sort of tell you a bit about how I got to where I am and what motivates me. And then I really, really look forward to your questions. So I'm just going to give you enough information that you know what to ask me, but I promise you nothing is off the table. I'm happy to answer almost any question in the world. I might not know the answer to any deep science questions or something, but if you want to ask me about me and things that I've done, I'm really happy to tell you and be very open. So lovely to meet you all. So I thought I'd just start sort of going through, the timeline of what took me to where I am now, which is working in digital in innovation and in inventions. So when I was a kid, I guess everyone thinks they were a pretty normal kid. I liked going to the beach and I liked riding my bike and I hang out with my sister and mom and dad. But I also really enjoyed playing with Meccano and lots of doing building activities. But I also had a book of inventions, and looking back on them now, maybe they're a bit silly, but I think it's a fun thing to do, to keep a little jot down your ideas as they come along. So one of them, I really loved volcanoes, and I was kind of a bit worried that we might have a volcano and how would we escape. And I think in one of my early drawings, I can see I've put unpopped popcorn in the bottom of the house and built my house on a pile of unpopped popcorn. And I was thinking that when the volcano came and the lava, it would cook the popcorn and launch us to safety. So I'm not saying these were great inventions, but happy to share silly inventions from my invention book if you want to ask about them. But I think, I guess my learning there, and I'll kind of give us 3 or 4 learnings along the way, is don't lose your creativity and curiosity. I think that's really key in science and in STEM, is just keeping that curiosity going. There's no such thing as a bad idea. And I think that's a really important theme you're going to hear me keep talking about. So then in high school, I enjoyed high school fairly much. Didn't love all the assessment, but that's just part of learning and growing up, I think. And I liked sport and music and stuff. I mean, I enjoyed my science classes, but I did in year 12, I did chemistry, maths, physics, but also geography, history, and English. So a bit of a mix there, half humanities, half STEM. And I think it's really important. My learning there is really to keep it broad. I mean, of course, if you love STEM, do as much as you can. But if you're not quite sure and you're thinking, I don't know if I want to, and in order to just work in STEM, it's super hard work, or it's not for me. I think keep yourself broad. My friend she went to school with me, but she's now a famous actress. She's on TV, she's on Home and Away and movies and stuff like that. And she did drama and stuff at high school and had a great time doing that. But she never did maths. She didn't finish after year 10, she dropped maths. And when she was an adult, she wanted to start her own business, which is really innovative of her. And when she went to apply to do a business course, they said, oh, you haven't done high school maths, you're not allowed in. Now, of course, it's not the end of the world. There's all sorts of little sub courses you can do at the time, but she really closed some doors for her future by just not keeping going. And I think one thing I want to leave you with is it's okay to be in the bottom half of your maths class or the bottom half of your chemistry or the bottom half of your physics class, because the knowledge that you get is more important for your future than getting 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 on a test. And I think that the way that science was traditionally taught, and it has been a long time since I was at school, so hopefully things have improved. There's a lot of making sure you're the best in the top and times table races and it was much more about scoring than maybe history or geography or English was. And I think that's actually counterintuitive and the opposite to what science and STEM are. They're all about that curiosity. They're all about the creativity. And it's all about problem solving and being able to fail, being able to make a mistake. And that's where these new inventions and innovations come from. And so I just encourage you that if maybe you don't worry about not being at the very top of your class, and happy to talk about the challenges juggling that with ATAR scores and stuff if year 12 is in the room or people in year 10 going to make those decisions. But I think that piece on failing, and it doesn't have to be correct all of the time, is a really important part of working in STEM as well. Being comfortable that you don't know what's going to happen. It's an experiment and it might fail. And some of the biggest inventions that we use every day were fails. One example is the Post-it note. The guy who invented the Post-it note was trying really hard to invent a really, really permanent glue. And one thing we know about Post-it notes is they're very non-permanent. And he failed. Like he couldn't get this adhesive to work. He couldn't get it to be really, really sticky. It was just holding pieces of paper. And he sort of found his own uses for it, honestly, as a bookmark that he could move around in his books. And he kind of showed some people, and it took years before people saw the use in it. But now, obviously, Post-it notes are a big product we all use and know about. And so lots of these things start as a failure. And so being comfortable that failure is okay, and when not even thinking of it as failure, thinking of it as a learning, or taking that creativity and that curiosity to those problems. Bubble wrap's also a failure. People, you won't believe this, they wanted to make a fun textured wallpaper, and so they invented this, it was the 70s, I think, fun textured wallpaper, and people thought it was kind of interesting. We all like popping bubble wrap, but it did not really take off as a what we know today is more of a packing material. And it wasn't until computers really caught up and needed to be moved around, and they needed packing material that they sort of got used there. So the inventors of bubble wrap, did the wallpaper thing and didn't quite work. They thought it could be a good insulator, didn't quite work. But that's obviously something we use every day. And if you want to ask more questions, I've got some more stories about products we use every day that started out as a bit of a mistake or a bit of a fail as well. And so, I finished high school and I did fairly well. I got an ATAR in the 90s, and I wanted to go and do, I didn't know what I wanted to do actually. So my family are all artists. They all work in the arts. And mainly in theatre and performing arts, but also sculpture and painting. So I'd never met an engineer or a scientist ever until I was at a school talk, kind of like this. Obviously, it was in person. And I thought, wow, I never thought of doing that. I'd never thought of the skills that I had being useful in this area. And I think that's why I'm really passionate about coming and talking to you guys today and answering any questions you've got, because that was a real turning point for me. And so, I got to the crunch time, and I was a careers counsellor in year 11 and 12 and having to choose which courses to apply for. And I thought, oh, I'll do science and engineering. And I'd never even met an engineer at this point. I just sort of picked it. And I think it's okay. I think people come and talk to you so they have these incredibly well-planned life plans that got them to success. But sometimes, things change and you bring that creativity and curiosity to it, actually. And so I think my advice to you is to spend some time with yourself. And this changes all the time, week to week, month to month, year to year. But what drives you? And I think most people want to make an impact in some way. They just need to decide what that is, and that can take some time. Or some people are lucky and they know from day one whether their impact's going to be as a poet, it's going to be a creative impact, it's going to be saving lives, it's going to be building towers, whatever your impact is, but also your distance from that impact. And I'll explain what I mean. So I knew that I wanted to help out in health, that I wanted people to be healthier, but I didn't want to be a doctor. So I was like, oh, how can I make impact in the area that I'm passionate about, but maybe further back? And so there is no way of saying who's more impactful: the nurse who's injecting the baby with life-saving vaccine or medicine, the person who organizes all the nurses to go and visit the children, the person who invented the vaccine. There's a whole chain between those people, right? Only you can know which one for you would feel like impact. It doesn't have to be in health, that's just an example. And so I was thinking, look, I'm happy to be quite far back personally. I'm happy to sit back knowing that many, many lives were impacted for the better, who'll never meet me and will never know me, but I was part of that. And so that kind of drove some of my choices as well when I got to university, and I did science and engineering, and I chose sort of pre-medical science and the health sciences and chemical engineering. And then I thought that I knew myself really well, but as I say, this changes. It's not all a linear plan at all. So I got what I thought was my dream job. It was at CSL, which is a big pharmaceutical company here in Australia, and they make the flu vaccine. And you might have heard them, because they make vaccines, you might have heard their name around a bit during the pandemic. They also do a lot of blood products. So for the Red Cross, and people donate blood, it goes to their factories and they make it into the things it needs to be in that bag that hangs next to the patient's bed, or to be in little vials of specific things people need for their health. And so I thought, wow, it's this and this, the dream job I just said. I wanted to do health. I was happy to be far back, and I've got an engineering degree. Let's go. So I worked there for a bit. Great company. I really enjoyed working with all the blood products. It wasn't like red blood everywhere. It was more of a giant factory, really, really, really clean, because these things are going to go into the body, and big amounts, huge tanks, we could all get in, full of the different elements of blood that was going to help patients. But for me, I realized after being there for a while that while I enjoyed the creativity of designing new systems and maybe thinking, oh, if we put this tank here in this way with this process, then we would have a better outcome. I liked that part. Personally, I didn't like all the compliance work, which is a lot of paperwork, or making sure that everything's perfect. I had to inspect over 500 welds to certify that they were correctly welded and they weren't too lumpy and the lumps wouldn't catch on the products and that kind of stuff. So for me, I thought, oh, this is not what I needed to do, not what I wanted to do. And so I changed. And I think that's also, you're not locked in, you can change things, but just keep asking yourself, what do you want to feel like you have impact when you get out of bed in the morning? And so I changed jobs to an engineering firm where my role was to go to universities and find out all the new inventions they were making, and then help them to build the first products and test to see if they were useful as a business. Because in there, I learned that there's so much more beyond having an idea to have the impact. So let's make up an idea. What if you invented a new surgical instrument that made surgeries like really safe and really efficient? That's amazing. So you might invent that at a university or at a medical research institute or at your hospital if you're a doctor. But it's only really going to make impact if it's in the hand of another doctor in another hospital. So how does it get there? It needs to be proven to be safe. It needs to be designed. It needs to have, design engineers make sure it's pretty. It needs to be packaged. It needs to have packaging. It needs to have safety documentation. It also needs marketing. How are they going to know how to use it? It needs to have a supply chain. You need to be able to make this instrument at scale, make lots of them at once. How can we do that in an effective and safe way? There's so many questions that come out of just having a really great idea. And so in terms of impact, going from having an idea through to having it a widespread impact, there's a whole chain there that I got my eyes opened to, that there's all these different other disciplines in that there that are required around business, around finance, around marketing, as well as around clinical trials and that sort of thing. And so that got me really passionate about these new inventions and how we can unlock these great ideas people are having, to actually get them in the hands of other people. And so we're doing that, yes, in medical, I gave you a medical example, but also in the environment, like water processing, and for defense, looking at explosive detection. So if anyone wants to ask me about those kind of things, happy to chat about those. And that was a really cool job. I got to go to universities all around Australia. I had a little team of 5 engineers, and we'd build the physical products, and then we'd go and test them with the market and find out who's going to pay for this. And that's the biggest question. And if you want to ask any questions about entrepreneurship, that's sort of what got me into that space. And I got to go and work in Singapore and Washington, and that was a really fun time too. So happy to answer questions about working overseas. And then during that, I went at one of the universities, I made friends with a professor who worked in child psychology. And it was amazing. She was like the world leader in this. And if you had a child who was maybe, 3 or 4 or 5, who had attention deficit, not just ADHD, but lots of different ways you could have attention problems, it's really hard for these children to go forward and sit down and focus in class and learn, and it has a really big impact on their life, on their relationships with their friends, and on their learning. So she devoted her academic career to making sure that these children had support, and she was doing like brain training stuff with them, but she was doing it face to face. She had really good evidence that her face-to-face brain training had really good impacts for these kids. So we came along with this question, this curiosity question. What if we turned her tasks that she did face-to-face into an iPad game? Would we be able to get the same results? So we worked on that for a few years, built the app and tested it, and tested it with lots of children to see if it was equivalent to her care and had the same outcomes, and it did. And that was just so exciting. So now her and I are both co-inventors, and along with 2 others, there's 4 of us, co-inventors on this product. And that also taught me a lot about, yes, it's great to do the invention part. Yes, we have to do the clinical evidence part, but we're still stuck on who's going to pay. Who's going to pay for this? It's great to help the children, and it works. And sometimes the government pays for health, but generally with every invention, even if it's a new automated muffin baker, it sounds cool, but who's going to pay? And so that got me into where I am now. And I'm about to shut up and answer your questions, I promise. So I had come out of that program with the kids app, and we still had to answer that question, how are we going to make sure that there was money flowing through the product so that we could keep it running, let alone making a big business, but even just keeping it running. And so I realized there's no help in Australia for companies who are in this space, companies who invented a digital health app or a connected health wearable product, and they want to take it all the way through to market and really make that impact. So right now, I am co-founder and I run a company that helps other companies who've got ideas in the digital health space to get their products to market, and helps them navigate their whole chain from idea to going through regulatory approvals to finding out who's going to pay for it, and getting it into market. And we are not for profit, and we just do this to help the sector. The government and industry give us money to keep our lights on. There's 16 of us now in the company, and we help the other companies to get their products out there, right? And those other companies, they've served 600,000 patients and they've created 350 jobs. And these are the sorts of things that I see as success. That's 350 families that can put food on the table tomorrow. That's 600,000 patients whose lives are better off. And coming back to that thought that I started on, which was decide for you how far back you want to be from impact. I'm very happy being quite far back. Right? I help the companies who help the patients, but I can sleep at night and I am excited to go to work every day because I know that there is impact in that chain. But I appreciate that some people would say that it's not close enough and they want to be right on the front line, building that bridge or solving that problem or helping as well. And so I respect that completely. So I think I'm going to sort of pass it back to the team and happy to talk about, all of these learnings, any advice, yeah, things that you might want to be, you're throwing up and considering, like which sector, and yeah, any learnings I've got, and also any of the failures that I'm happy to share as well.
Thank you, Grace. It's really wonderful and interesting that your curiosity from being a child at high school, you just the owner of a company. So solving little problems or silly problems make you to build your career in science. So I was wondering, and I was going to ask you about your start of your journey. You mentioned you are from an artist family, and all of your family members are artists. So what was most challenging or interesting you found to build a career in science despite being a member of artist family?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question, because there's some things that I've learned from the artistic community that are actually probably one of the most useful things in my career, and I'll share them with you guys now, which is one of the things about any idea is you want to get everyone on board with your idea. Whatever it is, it's like I've made up before, that automatic muffin cooker. Let's say that was our idea. And I want to convince you all that you should help me, that we should get together, that you should do the marketing, that you should do the packaging, that you should do the recipes, you know, and you should, yeah. So that piece of getting everyone across your idea and on board, that's very something I definitely witnessed a lot as a kid around artists, because they're saying, hey, everybody, you know, I need to build this big sculpture, you know, will you come and help? Or I need to put a theatre production on. You're like, will you do the lighting? Will you do the acting? Will you do the piece? Will you come along and see it? Will you come along and see my sculpture? Will you come along and see my theatre production, see my vision come together? You know, and that part of motivating other people and communicating, you know, why what you're doing is interesting, I think that's really key. And I think no matter what sector you're in, it's great if you have a really good idea, but if you can't tell anyone about it, if you don't have the storytelling, it might not get off the ground. And so I think that's why I really advocate this kind of balance, because I think that someone might think of a really typical scientist or engineer maybe doesn't have those communication skills or struggles there. And if that's you, that's okay. There's heaps of ways to practice. I'm happy to answer questions on ideas of ways to practice as well. But I think, yeah, the creative storytelling and getting other people along on your journey to understand your idea, that is a really key thing that I learned, yeah, from the artist side. And it's probably something that really does come in handy.
Thank you. We got a question and in the Q&A section. So do you think digital could be better for health in the future?
Oh, yes. I believe that the future will be digital health. So we saw this a lot during the pandemic. You know, why should you have to go into the doctor, into the hospital, potentially? It could be inconvenient, but also exposing yourself to risks when some of the information or the treatment could be done virtually. I think there's kind of a continuum of digital health. There's making health digital, like telehealth or being able to get a prescription online. And then there's all the way the other end, which is like where the digital health product is actually standing alone. It doesn't need a doctor to run it, and it's giving you health advice. And those things exist too. I think that's where the exciting future is. So maybe I'll give like 3 examples. So obviously you have telehealth down one end, and that's great. We probably all have used it or thought about it or heard about it. Calling your doctor, videoing with your doctor. It's a great way that it's going to be there for the future, I believe. And then there's in the middle, it's you know, remote monitoring, those kind of things. So a great example is right now, if you had a seizure and we thought it might be epilepsy, they would ask you to go to hospital and check that you're okay, and then ask you to come back and stay in hospital for 5 days and wear a full monitoring kit and hope that you'd have a seizure again, not because they want you to have a seizure, because they want to diagnose you and see where in the brain it's happening and see what's physiologically happening to you. That's what happens today if you know, broadly, if you're diagnosed with epilepsy. But right now in Australia, you can also be monitored at home. There's a new service, it's Medicare bulk billed, and there's offices all around the country that fit you, and you same thing. You have the seizure, you go to the hospital to check you're okay, and then in theory, as in it's true that they could recommend you to this service. Now there's a bit of a communication breakdown at sometimes that they don't know about this service, but now you do, that you can then go be fitted and do that monitoring at home. Now that's the future, right? It's just as good quality. It's had to be certified as just as good quality as the hospital. It frees up the hospital bed from having to have people being in there who are otherwise well and sort of hoping that they'll have a seizure so you can capture it. They could be home monitored for a longer time. Maybe there's something in the home that actually helps trigger their seizures that they can be monitored on as well. And that rich data that is gathered is just as high quality as the hospital data, and it goes back to a neurologist, and it's the same system after that neurologist has diagnosed you. So that's an example in the middle, I guess, of remote monitoring and impact that is here today that we can be benefiting from in Australia and digital. And then the last piece is where the actual product, is bigger, is standing alone without a doctor involved. So in that middle one, obviously there was someone fitting you and a neurologist looking at the data. And these are emerging. They obviously need a lot of evidence because they're going to be making medical claims and standing alone. But an example, there's an app for people with type 2 diabetes, which fully manages the diabetes, like having a diabetes doctor in your pocket. It's very, very personalized. So it knows you and all the way that you need sugar, blood sugar and insulin levels balanced. And it will say, I see that you're a bit high. For you, you might like to drink some water and up the volume of your blood. And for you, that should be 2 liters or whatever. But it also knows you so personally, it can say, oh, you need to order lunch. Here's some menus of places around you that you could order from, because it can talk to Google Maps. It can say you should go do some exercise, and here's how to balance your blood sugar during exercise. And also here's a Google Maps route that I recommend. So that exists. It's certified as a drug in the US, so you can be prescribed that app to manage your diabetes. And those kinds of things are really emerging as well. So I see the future, digital health making a huge impact in the future. And one piece that people often push back on, and I'm always up to hearing other points of view, is they say, oh, that's not very fair. I wouldn't want to use an app for that, or my mum wouldn't want to use an app for that. And I thought that's okay, because the existing healthcare system is under a lot of stress. If we can take some people out of it, and the people who come out of it are still getting equivalent safe care, then that takes the pressure off. So people can utilize the traditional healthcare service. They can go to the traditional diabetes service and get just as good care, as long as everything is evidence-based and proven to be safe. If you don't want to do it digitally, you don't have to. I think that's a really important health equity part, is that there's equitable care. No traditional care is not better than digital. Digital care is not better than traditional care, and that people get a choice over how they want to access it. And for every person who uses digital, it takes pressure off the system. That's more access for those who don't want to or can't use a digital service. So I definitely think it's a big part of the future. I think one of the things that's holding us back at the moment is if we invented a new drug today and we went through all the trials and proved that it was helpful, like an antiviral for COVID, then they take it to the government, and the government agrees to pay for that drug. There's a process. Obviously, it has to be safe and it has to be worth it, and there's a whole process of assessing that. But when it is decided that it's worth it, they will pay for patients to use it. That's why you can get our drugs at the pharmacy fairly cheaply. There isn't a similar version for digital monitoring, or digital interventions yet. And so it's sort of being held back a bit from it being the realized future because of the business. I kept saying, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for that diabetes app I was talking about over here so that people can access it? The patients don't want to pay a lot of money. How can this diabetes intervention, for example, prove to the government that it's worthy? And at the moment, there's no effective pathway for them to no even bars for them to jump over, if that makes sense. So that's a piece that we are working on to support here at ANDHealth, and also a piece that I think we'll see coming down the line, but it's a gap in the space, and it's a gap that exists in most countries.
Wonderful. We are also hopeful that that digital health will help solve this big problem of COVID-19 in near future. So I would like to go back to your high school life. What would you want to have told yourself at the high school to build a career in science?
Yeah, I think yeah, at high school, I did definitely think that it mattered a lot more that you got really good marks in the subjects that you chose, as opposed to appreciating that the knowledge that you learn is important. I don't examine very well. So at university, I got pretty bad grades when the assessment was an exam, and I got really good grades, like top of the class, if it was an assignment or a doing activity. And so, some people just aren't well suited to that. And I think I wish someone had told me in high school that that's okay. I was very stressed, but maybe I also could have spent some time getting a bit better at exams, seeing as they are a part of academic life. So I think I wish at high school someone had told me to relax a bit. Everyone's always saying it's so important, and it is so important, but it's important to learn and to listen and to take in the information, and try your best to be understanding and to be what's being explained to you, and to be curious, and where you don't understand, to make sure you ask a question. But I put a lot of pressure on myself, I think, around the grades. And so I think that that's not something I wish I'd known. But also I think a lot of my peers who did let maths go, especially, they were thinking, oh, maths is really hard, I'm not really a maths person, or having maths in my VCE or my final years of high school will lower my score. Most of them regret it. So if I could say to keep doing maths all the way to year 12, even if it's your bottom subject, it's just so important. It comes back as an entrance, like my friend I explained, but that's a really common story. But also, you use maths all the time deciding what phone plan to get, or when you buy a house, or, your life can be much better or much more difficult without maths. So also, please persevere understanding maths.
Thank you. So I would like to last piece of questions. So is there another thing you would have become if you weren't a scientist?
Yeah, I love plants. I would love to be a botanist. I would love to do horticulture. I know, I just find them really interesting. When I went to university and I said I did medical science and chemical engineering, I chose immunology as my medical science. And the reason I chose immunology is because the immune system is really interesting, but also they were very, they made sure to tell us, you have to get this year's textbook, because last year's textbook's out of date. It's not correct. The space was moving so fast. And I thought, I want to be in a fast moving space, a space where it's the cutting edge of science. So if I went back, I'd probably do neuroscience for that reason. The neuroscience and neurophysiological sciences, like, how does the brain work? How are thoughts actually conveyed in the brain? I think that's a really interesting area that's emerging and a really big focus. I mean, mental health is a big focus, but so is aging and the brain. And so I think the brains is the new frontier. So yeah, if I could go back, maybe I'd do neuroscience, but then also maybe I'd also just spend some time with plants.
We don't have any more questions in the Q&A session. So I think we could wrap up. So
sorry, I just saw one come through, if that's okay. I just saw one come through about working with people.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so happy to, anonymous attendee who asked, was there a difference working with people in the blood space compared to the well people? Feel free to just type again to clarify, because I was working as an engineer in a factory that made the product. So I wasn't working with people who were ill. So everyone was well, I guess, because they were all working in the factory making the blood products. So I can't really answer what the difference would be like, because I was very happy working with the other workers. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? All sorts of people all over the world do all sorts of things and have all sorts of personalities, and you can't say that this is a scientist type, or this is a mathematician type, or whatever. But I'll do some broad insights there. So like people who chose to work in engineering in that setting, very traditional engineering, you're building stuff, you're testing stuff, you're signing off on stuff, you're doing compliance tests, they were quite linear thinkers who loved detail. And you really want to, and that's totally fine. You really want to get, you really want to ask yourself, what gives you energy and what drains your energy? And if so, what sort of task gives you energy? So I actually like sorting things out, for example. So if someone gave me a mix of all different size nuts and bolts, I'd enjoy putting them in different sizes. So in that setting, I guess I was a detail-oriented person, but I don't really enjoy long checklists and checking stuff off, for example. But some people do. So if you ask yourself these broad questions of what in your everyday life do you enjoy and not enjoy, I think you can sort of get a vibe of what sort of people you might like to hang out with. So to get to the crux of your question, I found the engineers at CSL were extremely professional and very detail oriented. And those checklist people, right, they just wanted to know the rules. So people who said, do you want to play a game? They'd say, what are the rules? You know, those people. And so that was sort of the types of people that were there, and they loved sticking to the rules, and that's great. But as I kept coming back to this curiosity, creativity thing, I think that in the other sectors I've worked in, like innovation, entrepreneurship, it was much more about questioning those rules, much more about pushing the boundaries. Is this possible? Can we do it? You know, and those questions will be dangerous at working with blood products. I shouldn't be messing around seeing, oh, what if we do this? Can we do this? How about we change this knob? Because those products go into people's veins. You know, it's really dangerous. So whereas when you're inventing a digital health product for children, you can say, what would happen if we changed all the colors? What would happen if we added a new character? We can test that. And there's space for that creativity and curiosity. So I hope that answers your question about working with different types of people.
Thank you, Grace. And to wrap up, thank you for joining us and share your journey with us, Grace. And thank you also for tuning in. This series of talks was supported by the Victorian Challenge and Enrichment series. Don't forget to fill out our feedback form after you leave this session. The Shape Your Future series will be continuing all this year, so you can tune in to hear from many more scientists. All the information is on the STELR and ATSU websites. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining.